Good afternoon. You all having a good time? Excellent. Well, everybody likes to talk about debt, so I thought I'd start by just sort of putting it into a little bit of perspective. $28 trillion is our national debt as of a couple hours ago. That's $84,000 per United States citizen. That's $223,000 per taxpayer. The thing to remember about that is that it's only going to get worse from this point on. And when it gets worse and we run out of money, do you think they're going to stop asking you for more money? No, that's when they start taking everything from you. And that's why this is such an important discussion, because it's not about numbers and dollars, and it's not even about taxes. It's about freedom. And that's why this should be, honestly, the most important issue that we talk about. And we've got a great panel here to talk about it. Mike Johnson is actually, he actually knows numbers. He's a lawyer by trade, but he knows numbers. So take us, going forward in terms of some more of those numbers, what we're looking at right now.
Charlie, this is an important panel, and the issue should be of great importance to every American. We're in a crisis, we really are. And the team on the other side, Pelosi and Schumer and the Democrats, are debt deniers. Chip and I were on the House floor at 1 a.m. yesterday, railing against this COVID relief bill that you've all heard so much about, $2 trillion. Only 9% of it actually goes to COVID, and the rest is big government spending, right? Why is that a problem? If you do the math, just for context, think about this. Nancy Pelosi has been the Speaker of the House for 26 months. In 26 months, over $9 trillion has been added to the national debt. If you add it up, that's more than has been added to the debt by Republicans in the majority in all 72 years that we've had the House majority since 1859. Okay, she did it in 26 months. If this bill passes the Senate, which it probably will, that's going to be $6 trillion just towards COVID relief in the last 11 months. For context, that's more than the gross domestic product of every nation on the planet Earth, except the US and China. This is a problem. Last Congress, Charlie, we were talking backstage. I was the chair of the Republican Study Committee. It's the largest caucus of conservatives in Congress. We produced a budget. We entitled it Preserving American Freedom, because that's what this is about. If we don't get control of this, our budget balanced in 10 years. Nancy Pelosi never produced a budget in the last Congress. We had the only one on the Hill. And we showed how we can reinstitute fiscal responsibility, because that's one of the core principles that all of us believe in.
As you point out, one of the difficulties in talking about debt is that people's eyes glaze over and they don't want to talk about numbers. It's actually kind of funny that I, of all people, would be leading a discussion about debt, considering I could never balance a checkbook. So somewhere my wife is laughing that I'm doing this. But it is important to learn how to break it down and talk about the fact that it's not just about numbers. It's about something far deeper. You and I were talking beforehand about what the sort of end game of all of this is. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, Charlie, look, I'm blessed to be here with my friend Mike and Russ, and we've worked together a lot in the past on this issue. Guys, there's no more important issue right now than this. I'm just going to be honest with you. We are allowing Washington, D.C. to take over our lives, but we're paying the bill. We're funding Washington, D.C. to take away our freedoms. That's what we're doing. Mike put a lot of context on this. Let me give you another one. $6 trillion in the last year. Do you know how much we spent on World War II in total in today's dollars? About $4 trillion. But what did we get out of the $6 trillion that we just spent in the last year? We got a country shut down. We got small businesses going out of business, restaurants closed, live music venues closed, hotels closed, kids not going to school. And what did we do last week? $500 billion for local and state governments who were responsible for shutting small businesses down. I ran into the hallway Shelley Luther, who was the brave woman who stood up in the face of government shutting her down in her barbershop in Dallas, Texas. And Like, that's America, right? That's what's happening. We've got small business getting closed, schools getting closed, and that's what's happening. It's the tyranny over the mind of men. It is the force of government coming in, using your tax dollars and the money we're borrowing from China to come in and force you to bow down at the altar of cultural elites and believe what they believe. But we're not going to do that. And I just want us to keep in mind that we shouldn't be funding schools being closed. We shouldn't be funding endless wars without a new authorization of force. We shouldn't be funding China. We shouldn't be funding Iran. We shouldn't be funding the United Nations. We shouldn't be funding the UN Human Rights Council. But that's what we're doing.
You know, there's a lot to love about Russ, in addition to just being a all-around handsome guy. But one of my favorite
Same hairstylist right here.
One of my favorite things about him is that his first job in Washington was working for the great Senator Phil Gramm, who, if we could just make him king, he would have solved all of our problems. I remember I was covering Congress at the time, and I would sort of daydream, sitting up in the gallery, the media gallery. I would daydream when he was in the chair that he would just take the little white thing when no one was in the Senate and just sort of pass a bunch of laws he would, literally, the guy would solve all of our problems. Square Phil Gramm's fiscal conservatism with the America First agenda that has done so much to rejuvenate conservatives and animate conservatives back into politics.
Sure, I think that one thing that both understood implicitly, and that's something that Chip just mentioned, is that when we fund big government, it is funding the lack of freedom in our life. So you think of Joe Robertson, 88-year-old Navy veteran who was imprisoned by a lawsuit that was started by the EPA over the WOTUS, Waters of the Sea regulation. He spent 12 of the last 18 months in prison as a result of that. Is that America? That's not America. And so when we are allowing spending to go forward, it shows up with big government taking away our freedoms in our life. I think the way the America First agenda has come at this is we got to fight the issues that are front and center right now to the country. If we're going to battle China, and that needs to be a priority, you've heard from many panelists, we've got to have the fiscal stability to be able to fight that. And so, from the standpoint of freedom, from the standpoint of strength, from the standpoint of doing whatever is necessary to keep the people of this country safe as a country, that's where fiscal responsibility comes in. But ultimately, I wouldn't focus on the dollar amounts. I'd focus on the extent to which each of these things is taking away your freedom.
Yeah. One of the greatest things about Rush Limbaugh was that he didn't tell people. He didn't tell us ditto heads. He didn't tell us what to think. He told us how to say things. Yeah. He synthesized what we already believed and what we already thought into cogent arguments that we could then have with our workmates or whatever. And I just open this to anybody. How do we make this somewhat boring topic more? And you all have started to do this a little bit. More of an argument that you can make so that it becomes important to people that don't necessarily care about it.
Charlie, I'll take a stab at it. The baton was passed to Rush from Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
And in Reagan's farewell address, he famously said, I really wasn't the great communicator. I was just communicating great things. And they're the same great things that have guided our nation since its founding. What are the great things? Why are we Republican? Why are we conservative? We believe in individual freedom and limited government and the rule of law and peace through strength and fiscal responsibility, free markets, human dignity, the sanctity of every single human life. Those are Republican values today. But more fundamental than that, they are quintessential American values. That's what the nation was founded upon. And so the challenge we have right now is to do just what Reagan did, do just what Rush did for 30 years, not invent new truths, repackage and represent the old timeless truths. That's what's going to guide our nation going forward, and that's what's going to make our party successful.
Charlie, if I can jump, I agree absolutely with Mike. Look, I think one of the most important parts of the Declaration of Independence that we don't talk about enough is the consent of the governed.
Amen.
And what I think about, if you want to make this real life, It's consent.
Right.
You all in this room and the vast majority of Americans are not consenting to the use of government power to target you and your families for free speech, or to target, or to fund abortion, or as I said, to fund China or Iran, or to do all the things we're saying, or like I started to say before, the United Nations Human Rights Council, which has gone after Israel 100 times and never goes after China. Why is $1 American going to fund that entity, right? If you want to go to it, in the heart of it, we have to reestablish, and America First is a big part of this, we have to reestablish the consent of the governed, because otherwise the rule of law has no weight, it has no force. And this spending is the trick. You want to stop having government step on the consent of the governed, stop funding the government to do so.
I want to get your thoughts on this, but also address this whole argument that the only way out of this is you can only get out of this debt through growth. You're never going to tax your way out of it, or you're never going to cut your way out of it. The only way it happens is through growth. But I also want to hear your.
Yeah, number one, I agree with that. We do need to grow our way out of this, but growth is not alone the solution. We're going to need to also restrain spending over time, and so I think it is both. Yeah. It is both of those things. From the standpoint, I spent 4 years working for President Trump, and nothing did I come away with thinking that there's not waste in the federal government. And he would see it constantly, we would see it constantly, the $1,400 Air Force coffee cup, the Bob Dylan statue in Mozambique. We pay $50 billion in foreign aid across the country every year. This is just waste. This doesn't do anything to help the American people be safer or more secure. And we're going to have to keep going after those things and relating those to the American people, because they're the ones that have had to balance their budget and to have produced family budgets that account for the mortgage, that account for the school costs, but also get rid of things that is flat out wasteful. And they don't tolerate it in their lives, and the federal government shouldn't tolerate it itself.
Yeah. Are there lessons that we can, what kind of lessons, what states out there have lessons for the federal government to learn from on this front?
I'll give a plug for Florida. We're enjoying the weekend here, right?
Yeah.
Texas, Tennessee, look at the demographics. Look where people are moving to, because that's a good indication that they're doing it right with fiscal policy and every other means. One of the ways that we can tackle what both Russ and Chip are pointing to here, we got to get rid of fraud, waste, and abuse, of course, but we have to have more accountability. One thing that we don't have right now, and we get so frustrated by this daily on Capitol Hill, there's no transparency in the budgeting and the appropriations process anymore. I mean, this $2 trillion bill came to us. There was no regular process at all. I mean, we got to go on the floor and debate a little bit, but that's just talking points. There was no real way to go through this, cut the fat, put forward what the American people really needed. And that's a great frustration, and that's something the people can demand of Congress. When we get the majority back in 2 years, we're going to restore some order, I promise you.
Yeah. I would agree with Mike. Florida's obviously a great model. I'm obviously a little biased to Texas. I mean, one of the things that we love about Texas, the legislature meets every other year, and it does so for a brief period of time. And I think Congress ought to be focusing in on being in Washington for a block of months, actually do their job, not vote by proxy, not leave town, but stay there, do their job, pass a budget, actually balance the budget. And that's what we see states doing. And if you want to fix America, we got to look at the states and let states lead and agree to disagree, let California be California, let Texas be Texas, and let's fix, for example, election reform. Some of us are going to be talking about that this week. Let's fix election reform at the state level. Let's look at the way states do things and try to take that to Washington. But at the end of the day, you've got to starve this beast that is Washington and Leviathan from trampling on our liberties.
Right.
Although you have to do more than just starve the beast. You have to also cut spending as well. You have to do both of those. I do think that one of the most important lessons that I think that we've all sort of addressed here is the problem isn't that the federal government doesn't have enough money. The problem at the end of the day is the federal government has too much money, and they need to stop helping us so much. Just please, you've done enough. Thanks a lot.
Leave us alone.
Yes, exactly. Well, our time is out. Thank you very much. And Remember, it's about freedom.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.